From the Oklahoman newsroom, it is time for the Orange Alert, our weekly extended look at Oklahoma State football. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio with fellow columnist Barry Trammell, OSU beat writer Scott Wright. Guys, not much actual on-field football going on right now, but lots going on around the Cowboys, and that starts with the Biletnikoff, Scotty. Tylan Wallace off to Atlanta to see if he wins the award on Thursday night. Seems like he's got a good chance to, but how do you sort of stack up his odds amongst the other two finalists?
You know, his numbers obviously stack up pretty impressively, really, when you look at what he did in big games, especially the overall numbers, yards per catch, the number of catches. He matches up with just about anybody that's on the list. You got Andy Isabella, who played for UMass, an average team, but he put up great numbers. And then Jerry Jeudy from Alabama, who had solid numbers. Obviously, the Alabama name carries some weight as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how things play out. Jerry Jeudy has been a guy that's been popping up on some first-team All-American teams when Wallace has been second team or not mentioned at all. So we'll see how the voting goes. But you've got to think that Wallace is right there with everything that he's done. You know, obviously just a sophomore, but so is Jerry Jeudy. You don't expect this necessarily that to weigh against him, the fact that he's only a sophomore. So he's got to be right there. It's going to be a close race, I assume. As
we've talked about in a variety of formats, you know, midway through the year, I'm not sure we knew what Tylan Wallace, sorry, got his twin brother out there for a second, what Tylan Wallace was in terms of his excellence, Barry. I mean, he was good. Sometimes he was really good. But it really wasn't until that second half of the season against the better opponents that he really exploded. What's your best argument for him to be named that best wide receiver in the country on Thursday night?
Well, I would say what he brings, he's made big-time deep catches. You know, this is a school that lost James Washington and Mason Rudolph, and you think, well, the deep ball's going to have to be redone. Well, Taylor Cornelius, not a great deep thrower, has hit a bunch of big downfield passes to Tylan Wallace. He's also made, as you guys talked about earlier, big-time catches in traffic. So he's got a lot going for him. In some ways, the OSU newfound pedigree of Biletnikoff winners, Washington last year, James Blackman a few years ago, helps him because I think nationally people say, you know, Oklahoma State trots out really good receivers. So if you're their best receiver, you're in the running, and let's take a look at this guy. So I think it's going to be tough for him to win just because of the Alabama factor, but he definitely is in the running. I would have liked if he'd had a little bit better finale. Yeah. That TCU game was not good for anybody, including people that love the game of football. But Tylan Wallace clearly has had a breakout year. He's a phenomenal talent, and you know, we're pulling for him. He might get there, but it's going to be tight.
I tell you, who was wanting a better game was Scotty, me, and Nathan Ruiz, who were sitting there trying to figure out what the heck are we going to write about this TCU game. But that's a great point. He did not have a good finale. Neither did anybody else in orange and black that night. But Scott,
and Jeudy had a touchdown catch against Georgia. So
yeah.
You know.
Yeah, definitely a good closing argument there for him. But whether he wins or not, Scott, he's coming back next year. He's got another year at least to play for the Cowboys. Set out his potential path to really climbing the ranks of OSU receivers. If he doesn't win it this year, you got to think he's an early candidate for next year to at least be a finalist again. But what kind of season, you know, could he potentially put up that would maybe force him into that conversation for the best Cowboy wide receiver of all time? You know,
it's obviously a really deep list, but he, as a sophomore and a true sophomore at that, a guy who only had 7 catches as a freshman, to do what he did this year was pretty remarkable. And when you line it up against other guys like James Washington, Justin Blackman, those guys had really impressive sophomore years, and he surpassed some of what those guys did early in their career. So he's on a track to compete with any of them as far as what he can do. Now, obviously, guys like Rashawn Woods had some more longevity and you know, had a lot more opportunities to add to their career totals than Wallace might if he goes and has another great year, decides he wants to head to the NFL. But he's on track to have as good a career in terms of sheer production over a couple of seasons as just about anybody that's worn the orange and black. There are some really big names, but it's really impressive what he's done so far.
It's here's an interesting aspect of him too, Barry. When you think about those other guys that are toward the top of the list, whether it's Blackman or Washington, they played with the same quarterback at least a couple years. If Tylan Wallace leaves after next year, he'll have played 3 years with 3 different quarterbacks. Mason Rudolph, as Scott said, only 7 catches. Taylor Cornelius, and then who knows next year. That's interesting. If he continues to have great production and he does it with different quarterbacks, that kind of speaks to his ability to adjust and play with whoever is on the field behind center for the Cowboys.
Yeah, to me, it's maybe the best selling point about Tylan Wallace is this. The Oklahoma State passing game has remained outstanding. I mean, it's a big-time passing attack, and nobody's really excited about the quarterback. Now, some of us love Taylor Cornelius more than the masses. But nobody's sitting around saying, wow, look at Taylor Cornelius. Somebody's making that thing go. Maybe it's the scheme. Maybe Mike Yurcich is dialing up all kinds of great things. But what you really come down to is, hey, they got a receiving core that's fantastic, and Tylan Wallace is the ringleader. He's really making that passing game go, and he's done it here in a transition year. So to me, that's probably the #1 selling point about Tylan Wallace.
You know, he's also done it with one of the guys they thought would be the best pass catcher, Jalen McCleskey, leaving very early in the season. But Scott, that departure early in the year we've seen even more departures here as we've got towards the end of the year. And I think as we look at all of these in total, you can understand them on an individual level, whether it's Justice Hill leaving for the NFL, Jordan Brailford leaving for the NFL, a 5th-year senior already, a 5th-year junior, I'm sorry, is Jordan Brailford, has his degree. I mean, all of these things, if you take them individually, you can understand them. And yet, when you look at it in total, it seems like a lot of departures for the Cowboys right now.
Yeah, it does. When you stack it all up, you can understand why fans are a little bit panicked.
Yeah.
Because it is a lot of guys. Darian Daniels, a guy that everybody sort of thought within the program thought that he was coming back for that what would have been his 5th-year redshirt senior year after getting injured early in the season. He decides that he wants to go play with his younger brother for one last season at Nebraska and finish out his career there. So, some pieces have kind of gone in different directions than people might have expected. J.D. King was not a guy that a transfer was expected from. And obviously, we don't know the details of why he chose to go to Georgia Southern, but obviously to take a step down and go to a Sun Belt team for a guy who's proven that he can play at the Big 12 level for sure, you've got to assume that he wanted to be closer to home or there's something family related there. So some of these things are understandable, but when you look at it as a whole, it makes you a little bit nervous as a Cowboy fan, and it puts some stress on this recruiting class. Mike Gundy, I asked him the other day if he was even going to be able to have enough room to get up to that scholarship limit of 85 scholarships on the team, because they're only allowed to sign 25. That's a hard and fast rule now. You can't oversign like you used to be able to do. Once he signs his 25, he says he cannot get to that 85 number. So Oklahoma State looks to be going through signing period at least, getting up to about 82 scholarship players, and that can impact a team. There's a reason they want 85, and you want as many of those guys on scholarships you can get. So it'll be interesting to see how they manage that, what ways there are that they can get around that later, maybe in the summer. Graduate transfers or things like that can maybe change some things, but for now it's going to be tough to get past that, and they've got to kind of slow things down as far as people leaving, just to sort of maintain the reputation of the program right now. Yeah,
that's an interesting point. All that, you mentioned the word panic earlier, and Barry, should fans be a little bit panicked about this when you start to lay it out that those recruiting classes can only be so big, and you are going to start impacting your total numbers if these guys continue to leave? No, you should not panic, because panic never helps. You should be concerned, and the overall numbers are pretty sort of the concern to me. The truth is, college football culture these days, players leave. That's just going to happen. They transfer to other schools. They do the graduate transfer deal. They turn pro. All of that stuff is getting Oklahoma State this year.
The difference is this year seems to be a little bit more of the marquee guys when you talk about Justice Hill and J.D. King and Brailford and Daniels and McCleskey. You're talking about impact players.
Right.
Generally, you don't lose that many. So it's a problem. But, you know, for the long term, though, the overall numbers is something you need to worry about. So next year will be a very interesting year. This has been a disappointing year for Oklahoma State. They've had a couple of those over the last decade. They've always bounced back with a really strong year, though. Can they do that next season? It's going to be more difficult if the depth is impacted.
You know, as we're talking about people leaving, let's talk about coaches too, because we don't anticipate anybody getting let go off this staff, guys. But Scott, we're already hearing some names pop up as jobs come open. The head coaching market's been a little bit soft because you've had some coaches move into jobs that weren't previously employed. But Mike Yurcich's name has come up a couple times. What's your thought about this coaching staff? Because it remained intact coming into this season, which is pretty rare just in college football in general. Do you think it can stay intact going into 2019?
It's going to be really interesting. I think that there are at least a few guys that are going to have some opportunities if they want to take them. Mike Yurcich, I think, he's going to be a head coach someday. Whether that comes this year, it's hard to say. But Akron, in his home state of Ohio, is open right now. His name keeps popping up. Multiple different outlets have named him as a potential candidate there. Obviously, going to a school like that, you know, for a guy who's making $800,000 a year at Oklahoma State, there's going to be a pay cut involved. So he's going to have to decide that he really wants to be a head coach at Akron to be willing to take that job and you know, potentially cut his salary in half almost. So you know, it's going to be a significant change there for him. But he's also popping up in some SEC offensive coordinator searches. Auburn and Tennessee. He's both been mentioned in connection with both of those. Those are places that could actually give him a raise. Now, that might in turn make it even more difficult for him to go find a head coaching job later on. But still, it's an opportunity for him to elevate himself and show that he didn't just show up at Oklahoma State and you know, just jump on the train that was already running and all these good offenses just sort of happened. So you know, he's proven himself well, but there could be another step where he could go and do that even more. He could find the head coaching job that he wants. Obviously, things are in flux at Kansas State. Joe Bob Clements is a guy who's got a strong history there. You know, he's a guy who a lot of people in this business think could be a really good defensive coordinator. Perhaps that's an opportunity for him to go somewhere. And then you know, there are other opportunities out there for different guys that as different pieces unfold here and there. Jake Spavital already hired away one of Oklahoma State's analysts, Bob Stitt, who had only been you know, in Stillwater for a year. Go down to Texas State and call plays for him in his first head coaching job. So there's going to be some movement, and we'll see exactly how it unfolds, particularly for those 10 assistants at Oklahoma State. But there definitely seems to be a chance that there could be some movement. I don't expect any firings, like you said, Jenny, but there could be some openings.
All right, so we've talked about all off-field stuff. Let's talk about the actual game that the Cowboys are going to play on December 31st. Barry, it's an old Big 12 foe, actually old Big 8 foe. I mean, these teams have played for a long time. Missouri, Oklahoma State meeting again in the Liberty Bowl. But I think probably the biggest thing, while we'll talk about that and we'll talk about Barry Odom, who's an Oklahoma native, is the head coach at Missouri. Probably the player that's going to get the most interest is Drew Lock, the quarterback for Missouri. Who does he remind you of? Is he sort of a guy that people that watch a lot of Big 12 football might think, oh yeah, that guy, he looks a lot like?
Well, you guys brought up Will Greer, and
Okay.
I think that's an excellent comparison. Now, Drew Lock has not had as good a year as he did last season. Maybe misses Josh Heupel. That was his coordinator last year. Josh now down at UCF, but Lock is a very high-ranking pro prospect, and Missouri over the last few years has become quite the potent passing attack, and probably the best in the SEC. And that's not good news for the Cowboys because they've been susceptible this year to people like Greer and Kyler Murray and Tech and all the teams that can wing it. So you know, they need to spend these 2 weeks, 3 weeks getting prepared for a big-time passing attack because Drew Lock's the real deal at Missouri.
Yeah, and Scotty, they really hit the accelerator late in the year. I mean, they had that close loss to Kentucky, which people may remember because of the controversy at the end, but really since that point almost, I mean, they really got going. And granted, the SEC, you know, has some lower level teams that aren't great, but what have you seen out of them offensively? What do you think is going to be the challenge for the Cowboys as it relates to Drew Lock and that offense?
Yeah, you know, they almost feel like they're still a Big 12 team in a lot of ways, and Drew Lock, you know, might not be, you know, he's not a Heisman finalist like Kyler Murray, but when you start looking at the NFL, you know, the early mock drafts and things like that, he's the first quarterback off the board in a lot of expert opinions. So he's a really talented guy, incredibly accurate. In talking to some of the Oklahoma State players about what they've watched early on in film, they see a team that is going to really test their secondary. They know that they've got to be on their game on the back end, which has been a little bit confused at times with some of the young guys trying to learn this new system. So, you know, good news is they do have Jordan Brailford sticking around for his final game, and can use him in the pass rush. That's going to be very important. Obviously, they're going to want to get some young guys involved in some of the different things that they're doing. Guys like Brock Martin, Mike Scott, who's going to be around next year still. So, you know, that defensive line is building for the future at this point, and you want to see some of those guys involved as well. But this is an offense that is going to test them at all levels. So, and obviously everybody in a bowl game has plenty of time to prepare, plenty of time to put in some new stuff and do some different things. So not only will Jim Knowles have to be ready for what's thrown at him in that way, he'll also have to probably he'll have the opportunity to come up with some of his own stuff and have plenty of time to implement it with these young guys. He loves the opportunity to be creative, and I think that you'll probably see some new things from him in the bowl game.
All right, again, that's December 31st, the Liberty Bowl, Oklahoma State and Missouri. It's an afternoon game, so you can watch the Cowboys and go have your festivities. We'll have coverage all through the week leading up to the game, and obviously in these weeks leading up to it. So be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.